By the time most Americans hit their 50s, retirement stops being an abstract idea and starts becoming a math problem. The good news is that this decade and the one after it is when small corrections can still make a massive difference. The bad news is that it's also when the cost of a mistake gets much higher, because there's less time left to recover from it. Let's walk through the mistakes that show up again and again, not to scare you, but because most of them are completely fixable once you see them clearly. The first mistake is underestimating how much healthcare will actually cost. Many people budget for retirement using their current expenses as a baseline, then quietly assume healthcare will stay roughly the same. It doesn't. Even with Medicare, out-of-pocket costs for premiums, supplemental coverage, dental, vision, and long-term care can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars over a retirement. And Medicare itself doesn't even start until 65, which means anyone retiring earlier needs a real plan for that gap, not a hope that it'll work itself out. The fix here isn't complicated, even if it's uncomfortable. Get an actual number. Look at what a health savings account can do for you if you're still working and eligible. And if you're retiring before 65, price out marketplace insurance before you give notice, not after. The second mistake is carrying a mortgage or heavy debt into retirement without a real plan for it. Debt in your 30s and 40s is often manageable because there's a paycheck behind it. Debt in your 60s has to be paid by savings that are also supposed to cover food, healthcare, and everything else for the next 20 or 30 years. This doesn't mean debt is always the enemy. A low, fixed-rate mortgage isn't the same emergency as high-interest credit card balances. But it does mean this is the decade to get brutally honest about what debt you're carrying, what it costs you monthly, and whether it fits inside a fixed income. The third mistake is claiming Social Security too early, out of fear rather than strategy. We touched on this in the retirement age conversation, but it deserves repeating here because of how often it happens for the wrong reasons. People claim at 62 not because they've run the numbers, but because they're anxious, or because they assume the money might not be there if they wait. That fear is understandable, but it usually leads to locking in a permanently reduced check for the rest of your life. If there's any way to bridge those early years with savings, part-time work, or a spouse's income, delaying even a few years can mean a meaningfully larger check for decades afterward. The fourth mistake is getting too conservative with investments too early. This one surprises people because the common wisdom is to get safer as you age. And there's truth to that. Nobody in their 60s should have their entire portfolio in aggressive growth stocks. But retirement today can easily last 25 or 30 years. Moving everything into cash and low-yield bonds the moment you turn 50 can quietly cost you decades of growth you'll actually need later. The better move is usually a gradual shift, not a sudden one, de-risking steadily rather than flipping a switch. The fifth mistake is not accounting for supporting other people. This is the one nobody plans for, and it's becoming more common, not less. Adult children boomeranging home, aging parents needing care or financial help, grandkids needing tuition support. All of these are generous, understandable choices, but they need to be choices made with open eyes, inside a budget, not automatic defaults that quietly drain a retirement fund without ever being written down anywhere. The sixth mistake is not having a written withdrawal strategy. Saving diligently for 30 years is one skill. Spending that money down in a smart order is a completely different skill, and most people never practice it because there's never a dry run. Which accounts do you draw from first? Taxable, then tax-deferred, then Roth, or some blend? How much can you safely withdraw each year without running out too soon? These aren't questions to figure out in your first year of retirement. They're questions worth answering in writing well before you stop working. The seventh mistake is retiring without a real plan for your time. This one isn't strictly financial, but it becomes financial fast. People who retire without a sense of purpose often spend more, not less, filling hours with shopping, travel, or big purchases that were never actually part of the plan. It's worth asking, honestly, in your 50s, what will an ordinary Tuesday look like once the job is gone? People who've thought that through tend to make calmer, more deliberate financial decisions once they get there. So what does doing this well actually look like in practice? It looks like getting a real number for healthcare costs instead of guessing. It looks like taking an honest inventory of debt, sometime in your 50s, not your 65th birthday. It looks like treating the Social Security claiming decision as a strategy, not a reaction to fear. It looks like adjusting your investments gradually, not panicking into cash all at once. It looks like naming out loud whatever financial support you're giving to other people, so it's a decision instead of a leak. It looks like writing down a withdrawal plan before you need one. And it looks like knowing what you'll actually do with your time, not just your money. None of this requires perfect knowledge or a finance degree. Most of it just requires looking directly at the numbers most people would rather not look at until they absolutely have to. The people who handle this decade well aren't the ones who never made mistakes earlier in life. They're the ones who took an honest inventory in their 50s and 60s, while there was still time to make real adjustments. That's really the whole point of this stage. Not perfection, just enough clarity early enough to actually use it.